Will you pray with me? Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing in your sight. Oh Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. It is an intimidating thing to preach to the congregation of Old South Church in Boston about tradition. We are in a series on sources of authority, about ways of knowing about God, ways of knowing who we are when we say we are the church. And surely tradition, what we do again and again, the habits that shape us into a distinct congregation of people. Surely tradition is one of those ways. But what can you say about tradition to a people who have a history of bucking it? What role does tradition play for a people originally formed as a congregation because they decided a tradition was hurting people so much it could not be allowed to stand? Old South, as Miss Kate loves to tell us, was formed in 1669 by people unwilling to keep the tradition of only baptizing the babies of full members of the church. They were so unwilling to bend to tradition that they broke off from the first church in Boston so that they could do a new thing. A new thing that they believed to be the faithful thing. A new way of being the church. A new outward sign of who they were and what it meant to be the people of God together. And perhaps here is where we can find the role of tradition at Old South. Perhaps we are a people with a tradition of changing our traditions, of seeking that which helps God's kingdom come on earth and letting the rest go. Perhaps we are a people less bound by tradition and more a people formed by what theologian Mary Elizabeth Moore calls traditioning. Traditioning is harder, which I think you know. It takes more courage, more work. But I also think that it is the way of faithful people, people seeking for it to be on earth as it is in heaven. Traditioning is the diligent, regular practice that always asks its people to be holding traditions loosely, while looking at their past, their present, and their future in light of the people, the world, and the church of today. To always be asking if our outward signs match our inner values. To always be asking if our ways hinder or help the kingdom come. Traditioning is the work of continuity and change. The work of being and becoming. The work of examining every part of what it is to be the church together, asking if it is fit for purpose, if we're getting closer to God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven, and being willing to set it down if it is not. We're living out traditioning as we speak in these summer months. For festival worship happens in the sanctuary. That is our tradition in this 174-year-old building, in this 355-year-old congregation. Worship happens in the sanctuary. Except when it is too hot. When the tradition would come at the cost of the flourishing life of the congregation, of the fullness of God's people being able to gather together for worship, then tradition yields for the well-being of the people. And the value of being a church that welcomes all means that festival worship happens in the chapel. And no one has to choose between their health and the chance to worship God in community. Traditioning might sound a bit scary. It offers less of the reliability of tradition, less of the certainty of how things always have been. But I put to you that our faith is one of traditioning, that we are a traditioning people, and that one of our longest and best traditions, reciting the Lord's Prayer, is reciting a traditioning prayer. A prayer for people holding the now and the not yet. People holding continuity and change, holding tightly to the values of the people of God and open-handedly to all of the practices. Seeking always for the kingdom to come and God's will to be done and letting the rest go. The Lord's Prayer is many things. A tradition passed down through the generations, a part of our liturgy, held in common with our siblings across the faith. A prayer for people committed to continuity and to change. Matthew, the gospel writer in our passage today, was writing for a people committed to continuity and to change. He was writing to a community of Jewish Christians, writing a gospel that claimed that following Jesus as the Messiah was both the fulfillment of the law and the prophets and an entirely new way of living, for the long-awaited Messiah had come. The Jesus we see in Matthew's gospel in our passage is, I think, offering a prayer for a people engaged in the costly work of that change, of examining every part of what it is to be God's people together, asking if it is fit for purpose, if it gets us closer to God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven, and being willing to set it down if it does not. This is the text of the prayer. Our Father in heaven, may your name be revered as holy. May your kingdom come, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. You are a traditioning people, Old South Church, and so I think you know a little bit about change. You know that it goes better when you can always point to a clear, shared vision. When your people have enough resources that scarcity isn't running the show. When you approach the conflict that arises, for it does arise, with both humility and a quickness to forgive. This prayer that we let form and inform and reform us every week, has all of that in 10 short lines. A clear vision for God's name to be holy, for their kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven. A prayer for enough, for daily bread that sustains as everything else changes. A prayer for a people self-aware enough to know their faults and ready to forgive the faults of others, knowing that trials will arise and conflict will come. A humble people with enough resources and a clear vision can do almost anything. The people Matthew was writing to needed to. They faced persecution from both sides. They were neither Jewish enough for Jewish people nor worshiping the gods of their broader context. Their ways fit neither their traditions nor their world. They needed vision to remind them whose they were and why they were doing what they were doing. Daily bread to sustain them as they did it. Humility and forgiveness to keep them in community with one another as they changed, and that change led to conflict. When the dissenting brethren broke away from Boston's first church in 1669, it cost them almost everything. Your forebears lost their building. They found themselves in deep and lasting conflict with their former congregation and wrapped up in months of civic and religious deceit and bureaucracy as they worked with magistrates and ministers to become a new church. Loss of resources and conflict, especially conflict over money, are the bread and butter of change. The daily bread of becoming who you're called to be when that means breaking with tradition, doing something differently as a worshiping community. That doesn't mean they didn't do it. Just as Matthew's community of Jesus followers had before them, it just meant that change had a cost. And they paid the cost. They broke with tradition. They changed their building and their minister and their membership and their status in their world. And they got the gift. The gift of new babies baptized into full communion and community. The gift of parents welcomed and not shamed. The gift of seeing God's will be done and the kingdom come a bit more on earth as it is in heaven. Their break with tradition means we inherited their tradition. Means that just this year, Markham and Madeline and Saida and Chloe and James and Mackenzie and Madeline were welcomed into this church. 7 baby parades, 7 welcomed families, 7 beloved ones at home in this community of God. Traditioning is hard. It takes courage and work. It takes humility and forgiveness. It requires a people to keep their sights on their values no matter what, and to hold these values over every tradition they have. Tradition matters because the kingdom has not come yet. Our world still chooses violence and exclusion and selfishness over love. Sometimes we do too. We are still a people longing for God's will to be done, longing for it to be on earth as it is in heaven. We are still a people with ways that fit perfectly neither our traditions nor our world. As long as we are, we must be engaged in the work of asking if our traditions hinder or help, if they get in or open the way for more people to join us at the table. Our church was formed by a community willing to give up everything so that more people could encounter the living God. May we have the courage to do so too. Amen.